And joining us now here in the studio, Jim McCarter, Auditor General of the province of Ontario. Nice to have you back in that chair, Auditor.
Good to be back, Steve.
We want to remind everybody that you can be part of tonight's discussion. Our producers are hosting a live chat right now on the homepage. That's theagenda.tvo.org, so chime in on the chat or send us a tweet, hashtag the agenda, and join our conversation via Twitter. Okay, let's see if we can better understand our electricity bills a little bit. In your 2011 Auditor's Report, you talk about the global adjustment. What is that?
This way I can explain it. If you look at your typical bill, it's comprised of a number of components. The cost of electricity, transmission, the debt retirement charge. The biggest component is the cost of electricity, and that's about 45% of a typical householder's bill. And the global adjustment is a significant part of that cost of electricity. I brought a chart here, Steve, that I could show you here. The global adjustment is that darker color there. We're typically paying around 7 to 8 cents a kilowatt hour right now. Now, that's comprised of two components. The first part up here, which is really the spot or the market price, it's actually been going down because the supply of electricity has been going up over time and the demand has been going down. We haven't recovered from the recession. However, the global adjustment is the extra price that we have to pay because we've got a lot of contracts with nuclear plants, with wind and solar power, we've got a lot of new gas generation coming on, and the cost of that contracted power is a lot more than the market price that we're paying. So essentially, the global adjustment is really that part where we're paying more than the spot price for electricity.
Hold that up for just a little while longer, because I notice at the left end of that chart, that global adjustment is very insignificant, and then it really burgeons as you go along.
That's a good question, Steve. The reason that's happening is because going back here, our supply was not as great and our demand was a lot greater. So as with any commodity, when you've got not very much supply and a lot of demand, your market price is up. In recent years, our demand has been going down, but our supply has been going up. So what's been happening is the market price, the spot price of power has been going down to about 3–4 cents. Sometimes it's hitting not even 3 cents. We have to make up that cost because we're paying gas turbine people 10 cents a kilowatt hour. We're paying solar people 80 cents a kilowatt hour. We're paying wind between 13 and 15 cents a kilowatt hour. At the end of the day, the ratepayers have to pay that cost. They lump all that into what's called the global adjustment. Now, on your bill, only 15% of consumers are actually going to see that being separated. If you're with a retailer, it's broken out, but for most of us, 85% of our bill, you just see this one figure in here, the electricity. There's no breakdown of where that's coming from.
Okay, I think you can put that down now, thank you. Let's understand why these numbers are the way they are. I want to understand if it would be this way regardless of who were in power at Queen's Park, or is it this way because of a particular policy decision of a particular government?
Well, sounds like a bit of a leading question, but the answer is yes. Essentially, what the government's decided to do is their green energy policy is they want to bring on a lot of renewable power and basically phase out coal. They did it quite quickly without, as we indicated in our report, not a lot of business case analysis, but they have been successful in bringing on renewable power and phasing out coal. The other side of the coin, though, Steve, is that this is expensive power. Wind and solar power is very expensive, and because it's not very reliable, you need to back up about 50% of that with gas turbine plants. So again, there is a cost, and the bottom line that we were saying in our report is try to be more transparent. Electricity prices are going to be going up. It's forecast about 8% a year, every year for the next 5 years. That's significantly,
Okay, so should we be saying it's very expensive so far? Because they obviously predict that the price is going to come down eventually.
You know what? It's hard to say what's going to happen eventually. Some of these contracts go out 15 and 20 years. These are not short-term contracts. 20 years down the road, that may very well be possible. I know we may have some more baseload nuclear coming on. But the good side of the coin is from an environmental perspective, we are bringing on more renewables, we are phasing out coal, but there's a significant cost to that to the electricity ratepayers. Can
I again understand, is it the global adjustment that will be going up 8% a year for the next few years, or is that the overall price that's going up?
The difference is if you take what we're paying, all the people we've contracted for power, it's probably running 7, 8, 9 cents a kilowatt hour. On the spot market, because we've got a lot of supply, not as much demand, we could get that power for 3 or 4 cents. The global adjustment to some extent is just the plug between what we actually have to pay all the people that are supplying us power that we're contracted in and what the spot market price is. And at the end of the day, the government's made the decision that we're going to be passing all those costs on to the electricity ratepayers. You know, we're not going to be subsidizing that through basically general taxpayer revenues.
If I understand your job properly, though, it's not really your job to comment on whether this is a good policy or bad policy.
You're right.
It's their job to do that.
Yes.
Now, you can comment on whether or not we're getting value for dollar, but it's their decision.
Yeah, it's their decision on whether to have a green energy policy or not a green energy policy. It's our job really to go out and say, you know, in the implementation of that policy, did you disclose everything fairly and transparently to everybody? Did you have an underlying business case? And so I think at the end of the day, the thrust of our audit work was basically to say, here's the pros and the cons. On one side of the ledger, clearly we're going to be bringing on a lot of renewable power over the next 5 or 6 years. There wasn't a significant underlying business case. We're certainly paying more for that renewable power than a number of other jurisdictions are. There were opportunities to make savings during the 2-year phase-in period, but the government said, you know what, we want stability, we're going to keep the price the same. So I think it's our job to the legislature to say, you know, here's the pros and cons, and at the end of the day, do we have any recommendations which might help really the people of Ontario understand their electricity bill?
Fill in that blank. What recommendations do you have?
I think the thing that we would say is, if there's anything, we'd like to see maybe a bit more transparency. For instance, if you drill down into some of the websites of the Ontario Power Authority, the Ontario Energy Board, you can get at some of this data. But, you know, for instance, perhaps the cost of this electricity should be separately identified on your electricity bill. The global adjustment is identified if you're with a retailer, but it's not if you're not with a retailer. So we had some recommendations along that area to make the transparency a bit better than it currently is.
Do you know if the government's going to pick up on those recommendations?
My understanding is that they're looking at it right now. What they're going to do, I'm not sure. We'll be back in about 1.5 years, and I guess I'd be able to answer that question when we do our follow-up work, okay. Steve.
One of the other things that is broken down on people's electricity bill, if they take a good hard look at it, is this thing called the debt retirement charge.
Yep.
And for a decade or more, we've been paying down Ontario Hydro's stranded debt through the debt retirement charge. Are we making progress to ending this?
We decided to have a look at that because for a decade now, we've been paying 7 cents a kilowatt hour. It's about maybe 5 to 8% of your electricity bill. The underlying legislation said this is a special charge that will be used to pay off the stranded debt. Stranded debt, residual stranded debt, which is $7.8 billion. Over the decade, we've collected more than $8 billion. So the public, the consumers, you know, we get mail, brown envelope complaints saying, well, where does this stand? The legislation actually says that the Minister of Finance has an obligation from time to time to provide an accounting to the public. We actually went out and we went to a legal firm that had done quite a bit of work in Ottawa to get a legal opinion because we thought it's been a decade. The intent of legislation seems to be from time to time, Minister of Finance, you got to tell people where does it stand. Based on the legal advice that we got, we essentially said, time's up. You know, we've collected more than $8 billion. And it could be that it's treated like a mortgage. Not all that money goes to paying down the residual stranded debt. Part of it might be interest. But at the end of the day, our recommendation to the minister was provide an accounting. People just want to know, where does it stand? When am I going to be able to stop paying this debt retirement charge? So that was our recommendation to Dwight Duncan.
And did he take it?
He basically said, yep, I hear what you're saying, Jim. It's been a decade. And I think the response basically was that we are going to look at this from a regulation point of view. We've got the numbers, and we'll look into basically doing what you want. I haven't seen anything yet, but my understanding is that they are looking at it, and they are prepared to, you know, hopefully come out and tell the public where this thing stands.
And just so we're clear, because I remember Tim Hudak was campaigning on this in the last Ontario election campaign, where he said, this is what the stranded debt is. Here's how much we've taken in. We've paid it off. We shouldn't be taking in this money anymore. Is the money in this case fungible, meaning that they take it in and they can actually move it somewhere else to spend on something else?
My sense would be is that we also asked for a legal opinion on the Act. How can the residual stranded debt be treated like a mortgage in the sense that, you know, to be honest, when you have a payment paying down principal, part of it is interest, part of it is mortgage. The legal advice we got back is that is certainly within the intent of the Act. Our point was, you know, you can calculate it this way, you can calculate it that way, but the public of Ontario, just tell us how you're doing it. You know, what kind of progress are we making on paying it down, and when is it going to end? I think that was our point.
You seem to be saying Hudak was right. It's paid off.
I wouldn't. No, I would. If you basically start, you know, saying we started off with $8 billion, and every year we've got interest on that because we haven't paid it off, then like a mortgage, even though your mortgage might be $50,000, you probably end up paying $100,000 by the time you paid off your principal and your interest. The government under the Act has the right to determine how it would be calculated. We're just saying, tell the public how it's calculated.
Tell us.
We want to know.
Okay. By that yardstick, have you got a kind of a fixed date at some point in the future when you think It will, in fact, all be paid off?
The Ontario Electricity Financial Corporation has come out and they've given a rough range in their annual report. And I have to be honest, we do the audit, but I haven't looked at it in about 6 months. But I think the range they give is someplace between sort of 2015 and 2018. But it's a fairly rough range. But again, we go back to what the Act says. The Act very clearly says the Minister of Finance, from time to time, you have to periodically come out and show the determination, tell people where things stand. It's been a decade. We think it would be good to do it.
I know it's your job to sort of stay above the fray in politics. You'll understand that it's my job to get you as close to that line of being in politics as much as I can. So let's see if I can nail this down. The Conservatives have claimed that the debt retirement charge has been paid off, that it's done, and that maybe to boot the government's mismanaged it. Is there evidence of that?
You know, it depends on how you calculate it. If you were to say we've collected more than $7.8 billion, which was the starting value of the residual stranded debt. So on one hand, you could make the argument, if we're not accruing any interest on it, we've collected more than $7.8 billion. On the other hand, the Act says that you can use it, you know, for this purpose, and it probably also gives the government the leeway possibly to use it for other purposes. Again, what we're saying is just tell people how you're going to do it. That's what the intent of the Act was, and it was the PCs, I think, that put the Act in the first place, and that's what they said when they put it in. Once the residual debt is paid off, consumers, we will stop charging you this debt retirement charge.
Gotcha. Jim McCarter, Auditor General of Ontario, we always appreciate your visits here to TVO. Thanks so much.
Thanks again, Steve.
Support Ontario's public television. Donate at tvo.org.